All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Chart Addicts podcast. We have a very special guest, and I have to do a formal introduction today because, Anthony, I don't know if I told you this before you spoke at the conference. I used to watch your videos religiously. I used to skip class in college and watch your videos. This is just wild. So, Anthony, thank you for getting on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So you recently spoke at the FX Summit conference. Just wanted to get your take. What was your opinion on the event? It was a couple thousand people there. What were your thoughts?
I thought it was a fantastic event. Obviously, a lot of people who were very enthusiastic, people who want to learn. Is a key component of anyone who continues to improve is just an appetite for learning. And everyone was kind. And so when you put those type of people in a room where they are enthusiastic, they have a desire to learn, and they're kind, usually special things happen. So I appreciate you guys inviting me and look forward to what you guys build that into over the coming years.
Oh, man. Thank you for taking the time to come out. For the few people that don't know who you are, you want to give like a 30,000-foot view real quick?
Yeah, I am a entrepreneur and investor. Built a number of different companies over the years, usually in the kind of software or tech industry, and then do quite a bit of investing. Majority of that is concentrated in early stage venture capital, but also have done things in kind of a private equity model and also real estate.
Okay. And what is your primary focus today?
We just want to either build or fund early companies that can grow to a substantial size. And, I really think of entrepreneurship as this amazing tool that we have in a capitalistic market kind of based society that allows people to build a life of happiness and wealth. And when you really think about what entrepreneurship has done for the United States of America, it's allowed us to solve some of the hardest problems that we face. We live in a world where the private market definitely gets a benefit from some of the public market work that is done, but the private market ultimately is really where the problem solvers get to work. And so the country is, in my opinion, the single greatest country in the world. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else other than the United States. I was fortunate enough to be born here. There's millions of people who line up, every single day trying to get a citizenship and come into our country. But there's things that we should improve. There's things that definitely could be improved. And so, in my opinion, the best way to do that is to do it through entrepreneurship. And I'm excited to help, build and fund some of those businesses.
And I really appreciate the breakdown. I want to go through your entrepreneurial journey as well, because from going from the military to getting into technology and your time at Facebook and all these different experiences you've had and how they've shaped your perspective. But my introduction to you was when I first got into Bitcoin, it was about 2015, 2016. I read Andreas Antonopoulos' book, and then I started watching your videos. Now, at the time, you were the spokesperson for Bitcoin, whether that's a title that you gave to yourself or not, but you were the face because Bitcoin doesn't have a marketing team, obviously. Someone had to be the champion of it. And you were what I would consider the first public maximalist. Do you still hold the same maximalist views on Bitcoin, or have your thoughts changed?
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't think I was the first kind of public maximalist. Maybe I was the first to do it in a very specific type of way, and really kind of use social media and try to, continue going on national television and really just educate people, right, on why I thought the technology is so powerful, and what the potential future could look like in a world where Bitcoin became an important asset. There's plenty of people, literally hundreds, if not thousands of people, kind of who came before me. When I showed up, I thought I was late. I thought I missed it. And so those individuals, will forever kind of have my respect. And I kind of feel like I stood, on top of their shoulders, and the work that they did is something we shouldn't forget. But with that said, I feel like with Bitcoin, Bitcoin has done a fantastic job of becoming the global store of value for an entire generation. There are a lot of people who buy Bitcoin and they just hold it. When we say a lot, it used to be millions, then it was tens of millions. Now it's estimated to be hundreds of millions of people simply buy it and hold it. And when you look at the on-chain analytics, you can see that about 70% or so of all Bitcoin in circulation hasn't moved in over a year. So price went up, price went down, all that stuff, but doesn't matter. They're just holding it. And so they are treating it very much like some sort of, digital gold, if you will. Now there's a promise of the technology and maybe even an anticipatory, kind of excitement that it could become a medium of exchange. People will use it for payments and things like that. So far, I would say that we get kind of a B- on it actually becoming a global medium of exchange. There are some people who for sure use it in that form or fashion. But also, if you look at the rise of stable coins, obviously people are using stable coins for payments as well. And so I think just naturally, if you look at in a very narrow sense, Bitcoin is going to be a global store of value. I tend to think that that monetary asset of protecting your purchasing power is a winner take most. It's not winner take all, but it's winner take most. And so in that case, what I tend to think is Bitcoin is the winner, and you can call me a maximalist from that perspective. When I look at things like payments or other technologies, the data tells us something very different, right? If you go and you look at stable coins as an example, stable coins are used more than Bitcoin as a medium of exchange. So
Mhm.
obviously Bitcoin is not the winner today. That doesn't mean that it couldn't become the winner. Doesn't mean that, fiat currencies, as they continue to be devalued, which is basically guaranteed by these central banks, won't lose the, kind of trust and position that it currently holds with individuals. But just from that alone, you have to say, well, stable coins are the winner so far when it comes to medium of exchange. And so you can go through all the different use cases of these technologies, and my opinion doesn't matter, right? Neither does anyone else's. It's like, just look at what the data tells you, and the data will ultimately kind of guide you correctly. So that's what I spend most of my time doing, is just trying to figure out what is the data saying, and then go and act accordingly.
It's a great point. So when we talk about money, there's obviously those three different uses. There's the medium of exchange, there's the store of value that you noted, and then there's a unit of account. So Bitcoin, as you just stated, isn't the best medium of exchange. How much of that is a feature and how much of that is a bug?
It's both, right? And that's like kind of where you get into the gray area, you get into the nuance. It's hard for people to kind of have these conversations because it requires you not to just label things good or bad, black or white. And so when you look at, for example, somebody who is in a country where they have a hard time getting any currency other than their local currency, and that currency is not good, then yeah, Bitcoin's amazing. Right. It's all I need is an internet connection. I can now access economic value that I'm able to transact with anyone else in the world very quickly, very cheaply, and I can do it without censorship. That's obviously going to be valuable to some portion of people. At the same time, if I'm in the United States or most developed nations, Bitcoin's a horrible medium of exchange, right? And not only is it because there's a price fluctuation, but also because if I believe that the asset price is going to go up in the future, why would I spend it today? And then I get taxed when I spend it. Right. And so there's all these kind of layers that are actually de-incentivizing me to use it as a medium of exchange. And instead, what I can use is I can use the same sort of technology. It's not exactly the same technology, but kind of blockchain based dollars, and I can transact very quickly and very cheaply with a stable value. Well, you have something that's fighting you. It's a headwind in terms of both the price volatility, tax treatment, et cetera, when it comes to Bitcoin in developed nations. And then you have a tailwind, which is showing you there is a way to do stable value in a very similar type of technology. And so when you look at those two things, it's like, is Bitcoin a medium of exchange? 100%. Like, there's, I think, 6 or 7 trillion dollars a year that is settled on the Bitcoin blockchain, right? Like, somebody's using it for something. We can debate what it's for, but it's being used. But then if you look at stable coins are being used like 11 or 11.5 trillion dollars a year, right? And so again, it's kind of like, in some ways, are we competing against each other? Like, are we almost trying to figure out who's number one, who's number two when it comes to medium of exchange? Like, maybe it doesn't matter, right? And it's just like, hey, let's get all of the technologies out there to people and let the free market decide who the winners are. And so far, Bitcoin, still holds about 65% of the market cap. It's been one of the best performing assets over the last, 15 years or so. There's some, cryptocurrencies that have gone up more in short periods of time, but really, if you look at Bitcoin, it continues to be quite attractive as store value and something for people to buy and hold.
Okay, this actually opened up a question. I think this was in a conversation you had with Raul Powell, but this might have been something that he said independently. I just want to get your opinion on this. He compares Bitcoin to gold and Ethereum to silver. You know how silver has more industrial use cases, so Ethereum has more use cases because there's an infrastructure layer on top where developers are building. But Bitcoin has a higher value in general because of its scarcity, and gold is not easy to move around. It's like on purpose. It's by design so that the value, it's stored in a vault somewhere at a central bank. And because of the scarcity aspect, it can continue to hold its value. Do you think Bitcoin was aiming to do the same thing? Because the block size, we're not going to get too technical, but because the block size is so small that it was actually a feature to not make it like XRP, for example, where it's readily used as a medium of exchange. Do you think that has a valid point?
I think that Bitcoin set out to do exactly what the white paper said, right? Which is electronic peer-to-peer cash. And so what does that exactly mean? It means that you've got to sequentially create something that people want to buy and hold. So there's a store of value. You would need to make sure that it's not going to be depreciated over time. And then you've got to start to build technology, whether it is into the base layer, the second layer, or some other, novel kind of solution that will allow people to transact cheaply and freely. And so when you look at something like the Lightning Network, you could make the argument on one hand that lots of people are using the Lightning Network. You could also make on the other hand, the Lightning Network is not that popular compared to global assets, right? Or compared to stable coins. And so again, I think people get very caught up in like one has to be good, one has to be bad. You have to have a black and white answer to this stuff. But what I do think is that Bitcoin, if we look back over the last 15 years, it's worth, 500 to 700 billion dollars on any given day right now, right? In terms of total market cap, it was worth over $1 trillion at the top of the 2021 bull market. And so it's pretty hard to argue that it failed, right? How many other, pieces of technology, companies, anything that somebody could build ends up being worth hundreds of billions, if not $1 trillion? Not that many. And so that ends up being a really interesting way to kind of view, the market is putting a value on this, and there's just not that many things are this valuable. And so obviously that speaks for itself.
That's very interesting. So, I mean, you mentioned that we hit the $1 trillion mark for market cap, and we did get some sort of mainstream recognition. Why do you feel like Bitcoin has not reached the full adoption that everyone thought it was going to have a few years ago when it did reach that mainstream attention?
Well, I think first, the story's not over. The second part is time is on our side. Like fiat currencies are only going to continue to be devalued, right? And so people are looking for something that they can store value in. The third is if you measure adoption by a percentage, kind of penetration of a population, whether people like it or not, like older people just got to kind of pass along, and younger people will grow up. So if you think right now, there's not a single person in the world that's 15 years or younger that has grown up in a world without Bitcoin. Eventually that'll be everyone 30 years and younger. And then eventually it'll be everyone 75 and younger. And Bitcoin was just a thing, right? And so for me, I'm somebody who I grew up, fiat currencies, like that was just the thing. There's still people alive today who remember before we had fiat currencies. Like they remember when we came off the gold standard, right? And so it's something that was new to them. But to me, first time I heard about money, like, okay, that's just what money is. I don't know a different world. And so Bitcoin will benefit from the same thing over time. But that's not a fun answer, right? It's not something where people are like, oh, what do we need for more Bitcoin adoption? Time. But like that is definitely true. And then the other piece of it is, whether people like it or not, price going up is a great marketing campaign for Bitcoin. When the price goes up, the media talks about it. People tell their friends. It becomes kind of a fascination. More people say, oh, that's interesting. People are greedy. They're capitalistic. They think they can get rich, right? So they kind of come in, they start to buy some, try to figure out what it is. And so I just think, it's like time plus increase in price equals more Bitcoin adoption. Like if you want to kind of put an equation on it.
No, that's awesome. That's really well said, because our generation, so I'm a little bit younger, I'm 27. Our generation sees investment vehicles dwindling before our eyes. Okay, so if you're going to buy the S&P or the NASDAQ at the highs of the market right now, how much potential do you really have over the next 10, 15 years? Maybe it's modest. Real estate is out of the question, right? Home prices are too high, interest rates are too high, so that investment vehicle has been taken away. So it really seems like we have few options, and crypto seems to be one of the only options for the Gen Z and millennials to be able to build a wealth creation vehicle. Do you see it the same way, or do you think that crypto is not going to be that vehicle for this generation?
It's like everything, right? So on a macro basis, global liquidity determines returns for many asset classes, if not all of them. And so if all of a sudden there's a bunch more money pumped into the system, interest rates are brought down, real estate will go up a lot, stocks will go up a lot, right? Crypto will go up a lot, all of it will. Over the last 18 months or so, we've been in the exact opposite situation, which has been we have seen liquidity drain from the system, right? We've seen actually selling of assets off central bank balance sheets, and so asset prices went down. If you said to me, okay, let's just say it's all one big trade of global liquidity, prices go up, prices go down based on that global liquidity, then really what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to build a portfolio that allows you to get exposure on a risk basis, according to whatever your personal situation is, right? So some people, especially if they're younger, can take way more risk. But if you're, 75 years old, you can't take that much risk because you need the money now, right? And so you're actually much more in a defensive mode. The reason why that becomes interesting is if we go back and we look at 2020, there were some studies done on portfolios at some of the large brokerage houses. Most of the people who sold in March and April that kind of shaken out of their stock positions were older people closer to retirement. And the reason being, from my kind of maybe assumption, is if you saw 2008, 2009, and you realize it took 3, 4, 5, 6 years for those stock prices to come back, you see prices crashing, you're like, screw it. I'll take a 20% haircut, but give me my money, right? Because
Right.
I need this to live this year, next year, the year after. I don't have time to wait a decade for this stuff to come back if that's how long it takes. Now, of course, as we know, the government stepped in and stock prices were back within months. And so it's unfortunate. But human psychology, kind of takes over, and that's why we get dislocations in the market. That's where markets are made between people who are long and short. And I tend to think that's no different than it's been for centuries, before any of us were alive.
A lot of great points. So a specific plan based on someone's individual investment goals, very important. You can't just give like a blanket recommendation to buy crypto or whether crypto is a good investment. It's a piece of a portfolio. Now, I left Merrill Lynch in 2021. And at the time, there was no institutionalized product to involve any of my clients in Bitcoin, even if they were accredited. We were starting to get early materials on education for the cryptocurrencies. So I knew it was coming, and I knew that some traditional product was going to enter the market and we'd be able to prevent it or present it to our clients. You invest in a lot of technology companies. Like, what do you think that we need to see? What tech do you need to see? An app that would help this go more mainstream?
For Bitcoin specifically?
Bitcoin specifically, and then maybe we can also relate it to institutional investing. Like, is it an ETF that's going to take this thing to the next step? Is it an app that makes it easy to send money around? What is going to be the thing, do you think, that will take us to the next level of Bitcoin's evolution?
I don't think there's one thing. And I actually think that's pretty important, right? It's not like, oh, ETF comes and all of a sudden 8 billion people in the world have Bitcoin. I don't think that it is somebody creates this magical wallet and 8 billion people have Bitcoin. I think that it's kind of death by 1,000 cuts to the traditional system, right? ETF's a pretty big cut, but it's only one of 1,000 cuts. And then if you look at something like a great wallet, that's a great way to do it. A great mining equipment, that's a great way to do it. If you look at things around the regulatory front, right? If you look at marketing, if you look at the ability for the Lightning Network to get built out, all these things that end up kind of happening, they all on individual kind of analysis, they're just one thing. But when you add them up, there's a lot of progress being made. And so I really do think that Bitcoin's adoption is just death by 1,000 cuts to the traditional system. And you can't point to one single thing that ends up being this huge kind of reason why Bitcoin's become successful. It's actually that all of these things happened. And that's part of what creates this huge barrier to entry for someone to create another one. It's because you have to have so many things go right. But it's also a reminder to people, you're important, right? Like, your contribution to this, whatever form or fashion you decide, is important as well. And so I just think of death by 1,000 cuts as a great way to think about what needs to happen for Bitcoin adoption.
All right, that's so good. And so that kind of goes back to the time thing. You give it enough time, as everybody starts to grow older, and those are the people who have been exposed, it's going to get that adoption. Now, as an insider, there's a few questions I had from things that make it to mainstream news. But as an insider, what are the top things in conversation right now in the crypto world?
Exactly what's in the news, right?
Okay, good.
Most people believe that there's like some, I don't know, secret board meeting. Like, all of a sudden, like, all the people who have been in this for a long time, everyone's meeting up and like, all
You,
right,
Elon, sailor in a room somewhere, just cooking up.
yeah. No, look, I mean, look, there's definitely private conversations, but I actually, in most of my private conversations, people are asking each other what they think about the news.
Mm.
Hey, what do you think about the Bitcoin ETF right now? When do you think it's going to get approved? Who do you think is going to be the first one? How many assets do you think will flow into it? Right? What do you think the regulatory environment? How does things like whether it's XRP or other regulatory cases and kind of how they're unfolding, and sometimes regulators getting kind of their hands slapped and said, hey, actually, we don't agree with you from a court standpoint. Other times regulators are being told, yep, you're right, and the court agrees with you. And so, like, how do those different cases end up kind of affecting the industry? Individual companies. Hey, I saw this company was doing this. It's similar to this other company, right? Which one do you think is going to win? Those are the conversations people have. And really what I find, at least, is many of the conversations are purely information gathering. People want to know what everyone else in the market thinks. And the more information you have, the better you can point your finger and say, you know what? I've had 10 conversations this week, and every single person has consensus that before the end of the year, the Bitcoin ETF is going to get approved. Do I agree with that? Or actually, is there some sort of opportunity that maybe I will have the ability to kind of go in a different direction? Right. And so again, it's not perfect, but I think that understanding as much as possible is really what people are trying to kind of optimize for in those private conversations. But it's really opinions about things that are being talked about in the news.
For sure. And I think consensus, especially the last couple of years, has gone out the window. Like, how many rate hikes were we expecting going into 2023? And look where we are now. So I think that, yeah, expectations have been a little skewed. So behind closed doors, what seems to be the conversation around the regulatory environment? Is everybody kind of on the same page that the SEC is overstepping their bounds, or is it just kind of like a 50-50?
It's definitely not 50-50. I would say that more people don't like the SEC's position than people who do. But I think it's the same sentiment that you see online from people in the industry, right? It's kind of like it's hard to convince people of anything other than what is good for their wallet. And so I think you're kind of seeing that play out a little bit as well. But I also think that you even see dissent within the regulators, right? Whenever there's some sort of case or judgment or action that's taken by the SEC, sometimes you will see some of the SEC commissioners write a dissenting argument, and they'll say, actually, we don't agree with this. Right. But there's a group of people. And of course, anytime we get a group of people together, people aren't going to agree all the time. And so I don't think it's like weird that there are people who disagree. What I do think, though, is that we have to be very kind of intentional and intelligent about, okay, if you don't like it, then what are you going to do? Right. And so I tend to think you need to be much more in kind of a builder's mindset than a destroyer's mindset. A destroyer just wants to destroy things. It's all about destruction, right? They want to yell and scream. They want to complain. They want to tear down the system. They want to do all this stuff. Okay, great. But at the end of the destroyer's, kind of evolution is destruction. Like there's nothing left. You tore it all down. Congratulations. Now you live in a horrible, destroyed, kind of economy or an industry or whatever. On the other hand, kind of the builder's mindset is, okay, if there is something I don't like, I can use my talents, my time, my energy, and resources to go and build a better solution. You'll hear me say all the time, it's like compete, don't complain, right? Compete, don't complain. And the more that you can go and try to do that, I think at the end of that journey is a much better outcome because now you've built something. Maybe it wins, maybe it doesn't, but you're actually building, you're contributing rather than destroying. And as we've seen over and over again, politics is the best area. There's a lot of destructionists that are just yelling and screaming at each other from both sides of the aisle. They want to tear down whatever the other side did. We don't get any progress that way. Instead, if people said, hey, I got a plan, here's my plan. And the other side said, well, I got a better plan. I'm going to build my plan. And the market would figure out who's got the better plan, what actually gets the objective accomplished. At the end of the day, the people would end up with it solved. Right? Like they would get the solution, regardless of which side it came from. And so I just think that, being an optimist, being a builder and kind of staying away from the complaining and the destructionist type behavior will serve people better in the long run.
I agree. But I genuinely feel like a lot of the complainers don't want a solution. You ever had somebody come up and complain to you about something and you give them the solution straight up and they just kind of give you this weird look? They don't really want the answer. They just wanted some sympathy. Maybe they wanted just to be understood. And I think it's a lot of that going on. That's why I appreciate, especially people like you, what you're doing is actually being involved in the game. There's mistakes that'll happen. There's upsides that'll happen. But at least when you're the man in the arena, quote unquote, you're going to have that skin in the game. So I think that's awesome. Let's go into the grayscale conversation. You said that building is more productive than destruction, but it's hard to build in an environment where there's no clear set of rules. If someone doesn't know and has not been keeping up with anything with the SEC and Bitcoin or anything that has to do with XRP, could you give your perspective on it, of what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, look, there are all kinds of different nuanced investment vehicles. You can have private market ones, you can have public market ones. There's one called an ETF, which is basically a fund that the shares are traded publicly. There are pros and cons to those ETFs. There is not a Bitcoin spot ETF at the moment, but there are Bitcoin spot ETFs in many other places around the world on other markets. And so people want one here in the United States. They believe that it would be kind of a better representation in the public market of Bitcoin's price, so more accuracy. It would have lower fees. There have liquidity. It would allow certain types of investors, specifically institutional investors, to get access to Bitcoin that maybe can't get it in the private markets based on fund mandates, things like that. And so the SEC has questions or concerns about how we actually would get that created and approved. Um, Now that we have very large financial organizations showing up and saying, no, we want in the game, I think it's going to be hard for the SEC to continue to deny this for long. They definitely, will kind of use it, in my opinion, to get done what they want done, and whether that's structure things, fee things, market surveillance things, whatever the things are that they're concerned with. Now they've got some leverage. They say, okay, cool. You guys are big organizations. You got a lot of resources. If you can check A, B, and C boxes, we'll let you do the ETF thing. Right. And so at the end of the day, again, it goes back to like, forget all the process stuff. Fast forward 5 years, there will be a Bitcoin ETF in the public markets, and it'll probably have, hundreds of billions of dollars in the actual vehicle. Great. Is that going to happen tomorrow, next week, next month, next year? Your guess is as good as mine in terms of timing. But I do have a deep confidence that it will happen. And it's because the SEC eventually will sign off because they feel like they've gotten the fund structure to a place that they're comfortable with.
There's something about this that feels wrong to me. When I first got into crypto, it really seemed like the cyberpunk era and the folks who were getting into it early, it was revolutionary against the traditional financial system. So now when we're allowing BlackRock and Fidelity to float the idea of them having the ETF, so direct exposure to the markets without any ownership, they will own the Bitcoin with a limited supply, but then they're going to give you exposure to it. Is there something in the crypto community that seems off about that? Or is this what has to happen in order for this to take on, the mainstream success?
I tend to think it is a byproduct of the success, right? Is if something becomes valuable, everyone wants to participate. And what you're really talking, when you talk about BlackRock and these large financial organizations, you talk about professional investors. They're paid millions of dollars to go find alpha, right? They're trying to go find returns. Well, Bitcoin has been one of the best returning assets, right, over the last 15 years. And so it's natural for them to want to get involved, right? Most of the people at BlackRock who are into this stuff probably already own Bitcoin, right? Not the whole employee base, but just like people who are intrigued by this. At some point over the last couple of years, they bought some Bitcoin for themselves. So in a weird way, the Bitcoiners at BlackRock are trying to create a vehicle to get more people to buy Bitcoin. Now, that's not the way it's presented, right? I've talked to some of these teams at these large financial organizations. There's 100% Bitcoiners that are working there. They may wear a suit and tie, and I always say, wear nice cologne, but they're Bitcoiners. They hold Bitcoin. They understand, kind of the value proposition of Bitcoin. And so, again, does that mean that everyone who wants Bitcoin exposure should go buy the ETF? No. If you can buy Bitcoin and you can self-custody it, great, go do that. Right? You should learn how to do that. If you're uncomfortable doing that for whatever reason, there's other ways that you can buy Bitcoin and you can hold it. Or if you say, look, actually, I'm not as interested in holding Bitcoin itself, whether I hold it or somebody holds it for me. Instead, I just want exposure to Bitcoin's price, and that's the most important thing, then you can go and you can buy an ETF when it's available. And so it's less about prescription. Like I'm a big believer that we don't need to be paternalistic and stand over people and say, well, there's only one way to do things. You got to do it this way. Instead, it's look, let the free market decide, right? Let people figure out for themselves what is best for them. And anyone who thinks that they know better, right, or they know best, usually egotistical position to take and usually ends up being wrong.
The magic is in the nuance, for sure. And that's why I appreciate
Always.
this conversation, is it's all been nuance. There's like, it really is not black and white. And when you make it black and white, I feel like we're getting away from real substance and kind of getting into clickbait. So I really appreciate you breaking this down. We have 2 really important events next year, and you've had the benefit of seeing so many cycles in Bitcoin. How do you feel like the halving and the election cycles will affect the price? And historically, are there any trends you've noticed in those two? We'll do halving first, because I feel like that's a bit easier.
Yeah. So on the halving, it definitely mattered in the past. I tend to think it will still matter. Like the people who think that the halving doesn't matter basically are subscribers to the efficient market hypothesis. And the efficient market hypothesis says if everyone knows the same information, then the market will find an equilibrium, right? It's efficient. There is no inefficiency in a market where everyone has the same information. What it doesn't hold for, and what sounds insane in that kind of theory, is if I say a piece of information to 2 different people, they may take different assumptions out of it, right? It's kind of like when you see public companies do their earnings report and they beat earnings, but the price of the stock goes down.
Right.
Right. If I said, okay, stock is going to do X, or I tell you, they're going to beat earnings by 2%. Like, oh, stock's going to go up. Let me buy, right? Well, it went down. Why did it go down? Because some people saw something else and took a different position. And so I tend to think that the most important part of it is just like, it is a supply shock. There's less supply coming into the market. If demand stays the same and supply goes down, the price has to go up, right?
The supply gets cut in half. It's not going down 5% or 10%. It's literally the supply is getting cut in half with a limited supply source. So isn't that technically just a recipe for a price explosion? Do you feel like that's important to Bitcoin's price, or liquidity is going to be more important to Bitcoin's price? They turn on the printer, markets go up.
It all matters, right? They all have an impact. And again, it's, you can think of it as like death by 1,000 cuts for price. Sometimes the price is solely determined by global liquidity. As we saw over the last 18 months, they drained liquidity of the market. Bitcoin's price went down. Okay. At the same time, if the halving was to occur and there was no liquidity change, price would probably go up some percentage. I don't know what the percent is, but it would go up. And so then what becomes more interesting is when you do the complex analysis of what if they push money into the economy, they cut interest rates, and the halving occurs. That's what happened in 2020. It all happened around the same time.
Recipe. Wow. So
you can go back and you can look. I was publicly writing in 2019, calling it rocket fuel. And people were pissed, right? They were like, what do you mean it's rocket fuel? Well, the price went up, like 800% or something.
Efficient market theory says that because everyone knows that it happened in 2020 with the perfect storm of low rates, a lot of liquidity in the system, and halving, do you think because everyone's anticipating a similar situation next year with potentially a recession, because I'm not a believer in the efficient market hypothesis, but to some degree, I feel like if everyone's expecting it, it won't have the same impact as it did in 2020. Would you agree, or do you feel like we could have a similar reaction?
People are dumb. Markets are dumb, right? Like markets are smart and dumb at the same time, because markets are smart in the sense that markets eventually figure it out, but also markets are dumb in the sense that people don't remember. I mean, if you go back and you look at 2020, the second they said they were going to go and they were going to print all this money, if you had studied it all 2008, 2009, you should have been like, I'm getting long everything, right? Well, if you then go and you look at November 2021, when the Fed started talking about dropping interest rates, Keith Raboy from Founders Fund, he didn't get enough credit. He literally said top, and somebody asked him, like, are you calling the top of the market right now? And it was these journalists, and they were like, they wanted to dunk on him because they thought he was going to be wrong. And he said, yes. He called it almost within 24 hours of the top of the market. And when you ask him about it, he says, yeah, well, because back in 2000, 2001, I remember that the interest rates got pushed down or pushed up. And as soon as interest rates started to rise, the market tanked. He's just a student history.
Remember,
he
end
lived
of
through
2022, the largest executives in the country, so you got Elon, Zuck, everybody was dumping shares. That was kind of my early indicator. I was like, all right, these guys are smarter than me. They know something I don't. I'm getting the fuck out. That was my.
What do they know that I don't?
That's because they're, they have those secret conversations with you and Saylor, and they're probably somewhere in that room. So, going into next year, let's talk about regulation, because I do want to hit on this right before we wrap up. There's a few companies that are threatening to leave the United States, Coinbase being one of them, and Coinbase being a publicly listed company to me seemed like the gold standard. Right? If there's going to be a company that survives in the future of crypto in America, it has to be the one that's publicly listed, that goes through all of the audits and the regulatory, all the hula hoops that they have to go through. Do you see this regulatory environment in America improving, or do you think that we're going to keep pushing all these companies out until they're all gone? Because it kind of seems like that's the direction we're headed.
I think there's a lot of talk of people leaving the United States. Some definitely will leave, but the majority of them won't. The United States is still the greatest capital markets in the world. It's still the most kind of democratic, the highest concentration of talent. It's still, you have Wall Street, you have Silicon Valley. It's not going anywhere. So I hear it. I understand why people are upset. Again, I do think some people will move, but the majority of them will not.
Did you see Brian Armstrong's message to the SEC? Kind of, it was like with him and his counsel, and they were on a video kind of giving their rebuttal to the SEC. Did you see that?
I did see it.
So he was mentioning that the SEC is essentially overstepping their bounds. And because of that, there's kind of like this runaway lawlessness in the regulatory agencies, which is why there's been this exodus to leave the states. If crypto companies aren't reliant on the banking system, Wall Street, they don't necessarily need to be located somewhere geographically. Do you think that's an advantage for them? They can go to the Cayman or somewhere and have a lot more success? Or do you still believe that the capital market environment here is essential for them to grow?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's always advantages to it, right? There's definitely there's definitely things you can do if you don't have a reliance on the traditional banking system that you couldn't do otherwise. But again, it goes back to how many companies are willing to bet their business on moving outside of the United States and basically saying, I do not want US users. I do not want to kind of operate within the United States. Historically, what we've seen is companies outside the United States are trying to get into the US, right? And so it's unfortunate. I don't like the fact that people are faced with that challenge or that decision, but I do think that there's a lot of talk and there will be very little action. Instead, if you look at Coinbase as an example, I think that they've really kind of threaded the needle in a really interesting way. They said, look, we're a US-based company. We're still in the United States, but we're going to now create a division, or we're going to create a product that's outside the United States. So a piece of what they're doing is outside the U.S., from my understanding, but they are still within the United States in terms of headquarters and employees and things like that.
Yeah, I'm always skeptical when I see the offshore, onshore kind of thing. There's a lot of commingling going on. And as we saw with a few other companies, that line tends to get blurred. And that's usually where these companies get in trouble. But hopefully they figure this out. I have two more questions. One is just going to be something that's dear to my heart. I'm Lebanese. So I don't know if you know this, but Lebanon's economy is currently going through a banking crisis. There's a hyperinflation crisis worse than Venezuela's currently. And I was wondering what role you've seen Bitcoin play on a political scale or just on a international scale to help countries that are dealing with hyperinflation.
I tend to think that there are very few number of countries that are actually dealing with hyperinflation, but the ones that are is incredibly painful, right? And in those situations, I'm more familiar with Argentina and kind of what people are doing there. I've written about the Lebanon crisis and some of the horrific things that have happened there, but I've talked to a number of people in Argentina, and people want dollars. Right. At the end of the day, like they want the stability, they want the backing of the U.S. government, whether that's right or wrong. That's what they want. Bitcoin is a part of the solution. There definitely are some people who want Bitcoin, but for the most part, people want dollars. And you probably could educate me more on Lebanon than I could educate you in terms of what people are doing. But my guess is that there's a mix, right? Some people want dollars, some people want Bitcoin, some people want both, right? Some people say, hey, look, I actually want 80% or 90% dollars. I want 10-20% in Bitcoin. And I'm going to kind of do both. And then unfortunately, some people are trapped. Some people can't get out of the currency. So, I tend to think each country is a little bit different, but definitely Bitcoin, stable coins, kind of the whole crypto industry at large has, some ability to provide a solution there.
For sure. I mean, obviously dollars is the most desirable thing that everybody wants, but when you can't trust the banking system, you can't hold cash, especially not an international currency. And so at that point, it's like, well, maybe a cryptocurrency wallet will allow people to exchange with each other, move money in and out, because people's money is getting confiscated when they try to send it to family over there. So at that point, Bitcoin kind of seems like a solution. Then I talk to my family over there and they're like, well, if I can't withdraw it into a medium of exchange that I can use to pay my bills, then having the Bitcoin is useless. And so there's kind of this problem where you need the traditional banking system to off-ramp your crypto until there's mass adoption, right?
Absolutely. And I also think that there is an element of the individual is not going to move Bitcoin's price nearly as much as institutions will, but the individuals are actually what Bitcoin was built for. And so in some, very fascinating way, it's like Bitcoin was built for an individual who is in one of these countries where there's hyperinflation. But the problem is if Bitcoin's price goes down 20, 30, 50% in a given year, as it did in the last, 18 months, well, it's going to be pretty hard for that person to make an argument as to like, maybe I should have just held my currency if inflation was 20%.
Not if the inflation is 99.9%. So that's
Correct.
I guess there's like
Correct.
an optimal range there.
Yeah. Well,
Interesting.
it's just like, if you give me three options, right? You say, hey, hold on to your local currency and it goes down 80% or 90%. Hold on to Bitcoin and that one's down 50%. Okay, if I just have those two options, like obviously Bitcoin's better than local currency. But then if you
Okay.
say, or get the dollar, and the dollar is going to go down 9%, which was the peak of the official inflation number, right? Or if you even say unofficial numbers got to like 15%. Again, you kind of get in this world of like, well, like the dollar is better than Bitcoin. Now, in reverse, let's say that we were having this conversation in 2020, right? And I told you, okay, your local currency is going to go down 80, 90%. You're going to see the dollar go down, 9 to 15% over the next, 2 years. And Bitcoin's price is going to go up on a net basis. So it's going to go up 800%, but you're really going to end up being up, call it 200 to 300%. Like Bitcoin's a better one. And so now
Right.
you get into this weird world of like, because the local currency is so screwed up, you're basically asking people to trade,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, for sure.
Like that's
The
insane,
timing, yeah, that's dangerous. That's very dangerous.
right? People are having to trade with their family's wealth in order to protect themselves.
It just opened up a whole new question, and I hope that I'm not taking too much of your time.
You're
And
good.
whenever you hop off, just let me know. But I had the benefit of talking to Brent Johnson recently, and we were talking about the dollar milkshake theory. If you guys don't know what that is, essentially, because most of the debt in the world is dollar denominated, especially debts from governments to the US, their interest needs to be paid back in dollars. So there's a massive demand and shortage of dollars in the world, regardless of how much we print. Because when they devalue their own currency, they're going to require more of that local currency to get dollars, and it's going to require them to pay back their loans in dollars. So that means dollar bullish over time because of that demand structure. How do you see the BRICS situation playing out? Do you see the dollar's dominance continuing to stay strong? Do you have an opinion on that topic?
I think that the dollar will continue to get more global adoption as weak fiat currencies fall at its feet.
Mm.
And so what we likely are going to see is Bitcoin adoption will go up and dollar adoption will go up. And then all other fiat currencies will probably fall in adoption and value.
I like that. Clear, concise. I like that a lot. Other alternatives to a global currency, we've seen WorldCoin come out and some other options. Do you have an opinion on those currencies?
No, I mean, maybe the only thing that you could take is I'm not participating in them. So, I guess that's some judgment by itself.
Okay, there you go. And then from your perspective, this is the last question I have, which is I've asked a lot of things that I'm personally interested in. Is there anything that's catching your attention, that's inspiring you in the crypto space, something that keeps you going in this space that you'd like to talk about?
No, I just think that Bitcoin remains, the king of the industry. And I think people get very enamored by all the shiny stuff. And look, it's cool. People are trying things. As Shamal said, they're in the arena trying things. But I tend to think that Bitcoin is still the asset that seems to be getting the most adoption in terms of market cap. Now, there are obviously things like stable coins that are becoming more popular in terms of payments and stuff like that. So it's not just Bitcoin. But I do think, let's not forget why Bitcoin is important. And people should spend a lot of time and energy understanding it because it'll help them, kind of be better prepared, I think, for the future.
Incredible. Pomp, where can folks find you online?
Just go to Twitter, just at Pompliano, and everything's there.
Perfect. We'll include that in the description. Anthony Pompliano, ladies and gentlemen, make sure to like and subscribe. Anthony, thank you for stopping by the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.